Stanford University.
Welcome. Welcome to Stanford Medicine's 10th Annual Contemplation by Design Summit. I'm Dr. Tia Rich, the founder and director of Contemplation by Design. I am deeply grateful to Dr. David Spiegel for sharing his expertise, insight, and wisdom with us tonight on the topic of the mental health benefits of breath work. Dr. David Spiegel is the Willson Professor and Associate Chair of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and Director of the Center on Stress and Health and the Center for Integrative Medicine at Stanford University School of Medicine. He has published 13 books, 425 scientific journal articles, and 175 book chapters on hypnosis, psychosocial oncology, stress physiology, trauma, and psychotherapy for stress, anxiety, and depression. His research has been supported by the National Institute of Mental Health, the National Cancer Institute, the National Institute on Aging, the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, and a number of foundations. He is past president of the American College of Psychiatrists and the Society for Clinical and Experimental Hypnosis, and is a member of the National Academy of Medicine. We warmly welcome you, David, and thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much, Tia, for inviting me and for organizing this wonderful and varied program throughout the weeks. And it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. And sadly, this is a time when it is more important than ever to understand about techniques that one can use to renew and refresh oneself. One of the wonderful things about our humanity is that so much of it comes from interaction and connection with other people. And at times when so many people around the world are suffering in so many terrible ways, from disease and wars, and when the technology enables it to enter our homes constantly, I think it's particularly important to maintain our human connection and humanity, to have ways to self-stabilize, to help ourselves connect with others, be in touch with them, take in the sadness as well as joys of life, and maintain an equilibrium within our spirit, mind, and body. So that's what I hope to contribute to, Tia. So thank you for inviting me. I'm going to share my screen here. What I'd like to do is talk with you, and I will leave time at the end for questions and comments. Talk about the mental health benefits of breath work, and I'm going to sneak in some about hypnosis too, since that I think is a related and important means of helping to self-stabilize. I do have a disclosure. I'm co-founder of Breathwork Health, which produces a digital interactive hypnosis and breathwork app that I will refer to later in the talk, and you're welcome to visit the app, available from the App Store and Google Play. Let me give you a forecast of what I'm going to be talking about. First, the brain-breath axis, neural control of breath and brain activation. Breathing is really a remarkable component of our psychophysiology because it's the only physiological function that is both completely automatic and easily, rapidly controllable. So if you don't think about it, you breathe. But if you do, you can radically control your breathing. And that has a lot of interesting implications for mind-body connection and mind-body control. I'll talk about a study that we conducted and published recently, in which we had 3 types of breath work and a controlled, brief mindfulness-like condition. And we looked at the effects of doing this just 5 minutes a day for a month on people's physiology and their psychology, and I'll report to you about that. There are some general principles about breathing that I think emerged from this study and from the whole body of research on breathing and breath work. I'll talk some about hypnosis, another powerful means of controlling one's state of mental and physical equilibrium, and I'll show you some examples of how we do that to help people manage stress. I'll talk about the availability of these techniques in the Reverie app and summarize the talk. As I mentioned, while we take breathing for granted usually, it's actually a remarkable and unusual psychophysiological function. As I mentioned, it can happen automatically, and it usually does, but it's a subject to immediate conscious control, but it also is an automatic self-run system that happens whether we think about it or not. And so it's a crucial mind-body pathway. It's a crucial door into the ways in which the brain controls the body, and interestingly, in which the body controls the brain, strangely enough. A famous paper by Balestrino and Samjian in 1988 pointed out that by regulating breathing, the brain alters the concentration of carbon dioxide, pH, in the cells, and synaptic transmission of activity in the brain, including in the hippocampus, which is where we process memory and emotion. And the brain, therefore, by regulating respiration, alters its own level of activation. And one of the things that I'll be referring to quite a bit tonight is the fact that changes in respiratory practice have a profound effect on activation levels in the brain. And that can be a good thing or a problematic thing or both. But there's a tight connection between breathing activity, the type of breathing that you do, and activation in the brain. So the brain, interestingly, is clever enough to regulate its own excitability, including in very important regions of the brain that involve emotion and memory, by simply controlling its respiration. Hyperventilation, particularly inhales, can increase brain excitability, while sighing, prolonged exhales, can reduce excitability and soothe very quickly. And that we'll have demonstrations of that, as Tia mentioned, on Thursday evening. But there's a reason why, on the one hand, excitement is associated with hyperventilation, with breathing very fast, which tends to trigger more excitement. But conversely, the sigh, the prolonged exhale, which we do frequently, conveys a kind of sense of emotional acceptance. And it's the opposite. It tends to trigger soothing activity in the body rather than activation. The brain network that controls respiration is in the medulla oblongata in the top of the brainstem. And there are two parts in particular that have an interesting relationship. One is called the pre-Botzinger complex, which regulates rhythmic activities. So this is a region that fires regularly and keeps us going, keeps our lungs working, regardless of whether we're thinking about it or not. And then there's the parafacial nucleus, which has to do with the process of inhaling and exhaling, but not so much with rhythmic activity of it. So just when you do it, that part of the brain is active. And the interaction of these two systems is crucial for adequate brain regulation of respiration. And so it's a combination of the nature of the rhythmic activity and which aspect, inhaling or exhaling, is being emphasized, and the actual act of inhaling or exhaling that gives us our respiratory rhythms. And it's very important that we have two systems. There's a kind of redundancy there as well that guarantees that even if one isn't working just right, the other will help. When people hyperventilate, that is, they breathe hard, very hard and rapidly, they exhale more carbon dioxide than they normally would. And they can become low in CO2, low in the blood and in the tissues of the body. There's something called the Haldane effect. And the Haldane effect involves the fact that carbon dioxide stimulates the release of oxygen from hemoglobin in the tissues. So hemoglobin in the lungs collects oxygen, which of course we need for all the tissues of the body. But then it collects it in a format that makes it difficult for the oxygen to be released. But the CO2 level alters the pH of the blood just slightly and makes it more likely when the hemoglobin in our red blood cells gets to the tissues in the body, that there's then a shift and a tendency to bind oxygen less and CO2 more. And that's just what you want, because the body's producing CO2, which has many functions, but is a product of metabolic activity that needs to be released in the lungs. And oxygen helps to provide energy for metabolic activity. So you want to be able to pick it up in the lungs and let it go. But if you get to a point where you are hyperexcitable, where you're breathing very rapidly, you'll tend to blow off too much carbon dioxide. And the paradoxical thing about that is that when you do that, you tend to make it more difficult to absorb oxygen, but then you're more hypoxic. And so some people get into this kind of bad feedback loop where they get more anxious, they hyperventilate more, and that just makes them even more anxious. It's worth understanding also about breathing that the drive for breathing, what we call the respiratory drive, has a lot to do with pH and carbon dioxide and not that much to do with oxygen. You would think that, when we say we need air, we need oxygen, but we do need oxygen. But actually the drive for respiration in the brain comes more from the elevated levels of CO2. So what this means, if you blow off too much CO2, if you're hyperventilating, you're breathing inefficiently but rapidly, is you have trouble catching up, because it's harder for the oxygen you do have in your blood to be released into the tissues. So it can create a kind of vicious cycle. Excitability, the brain gets excitable, it gets hyperactive, and you tend not to think and do your best in situations like that. You become less efficient at detecting things in your environment. And so hyperventilation and low carbon dioxide can even invoke seizures in people who are prone to seizure. So blowing off CO2 can make you anxious. And as my colleague and friend Andrew Huberman has noted in his terrific podcast on breathing and breath work, that increasing brain excitability makes it difficult for us to think clearly, to detect signal from noise. And so we tend not to be our most efficient or at our best when we are somewhat hypoxic and hyperventilating. So you can deprive the body of needed oxygen if you do. And if you hyperventilate at rest, you will have trouble breathing. And that's one reason why the old paper bag technique actually works. When somebody's having a panic attack in an airplane, you ask the flight attendant for one of those sacks that they have in every seat, and you have the person breathe into it, because then they are inhaling their exhaled CO2. You increase the richness of the carbon dioxide in the inhalation, and it will actually help them absorb more oxygen and reduce the hyperactivation of their brain and their excessive energy. So there's a reason why that trick actually works. When one thinks of breathing exercises to help people breathe better, there are three types that we were interested in studying, and they're on a continuum from soothing to activating. These three exercises is work that I conducted in full collaboration with Andrew Huberman and a group in his lab, and I'll introduce you to them, their names in a minute. But we got interested in testing the effect of doing just 5 minutes of one of three breathing exercises and a comparison condition, 5 minutes a day for a month, and just seeing what effect that could have on people's level of arousal and stress. Cyclic sighing involves fundamentally inducing relaxation. And the main reason is that cyclic sighing involves prolonged exhalation. So you inhale partway through your nose, inhale fully, and then slowly exhale through your mouth. And some people notice if they just do this once or twice that they actually feel different, that you have a feeling of relaxation. So again, try it. Inhale, hold. Now with your chest, inhale fully and then slowly exhale through your mouth. And so it's a technique that quickly triggers a soothing response in the body, and there's a reason for it. The brain, when there's close monitoring of heart rate and heart contraction of blood as blood is returned to the heart. And when you exhale, you're increasing pressure in your chest, which actually forces more blood from the superior vena cava into the heart. And so the heart gets a signal that there's plenty of blood. It doesn't have to beat as hard or as fast. So it slows down. It's what we call a parasympathetic response. We have the autonomic nervous system that regulates the heart rate, blood pressure, a lot of other things, has two opposing components. Parasympathetic is the rest and digest, soothing component that slows heart rate, lowers blood pressure. It's the predominant mode that you're in, hopefully, when you go to sleep. And the parasympathetic nervous system is running the show when you're asleep. However, if there's a loud noise at 3 a.m, you wake up, the sympathetic system suddenly arrives. That's increasing heart rate, increasing blood pressure, making it difficult to relax. That's the fight or flight component of the autonomic nervous system. Now, when you inhale, and we tend to think, the common thought is, oh, just take a deep breath and everything will be fine. Well, actually, that's not quite true. Now, nothing much is fine these days, but what I mean about this is that when you inhale, you do it by lowering your diaphragm and expanding your chest using the intercostal muscles. You create a vacuum that pulls air in from outside. When you do that, you reduce blood return just a bit into the heart. So the autonomic nervous system says, there isn't enough blood. We need to pump more to be sure that there's an adequate supply of blood and circulation of blood. So heart rate goes up. So that means that when you take a deep breath, just that, inhaling, you're actually increasing arousal. And if you keep doing that, as we'll show you, you increase sympathetic activity rather than parasympathetic activity. So in cyclic sighing, it's pretty much 2-to-1 inhalation, exhalation over inhalation. So you inhale, stop, inhale fully, and then slowly exhale. The second approach we took is box breathing. This has been called anticipatory, preparatory breathing as well. It's something that Special Forces, the Navy SEALs, use sometimes to prepare themselves for action. And what you do here is you inhale, hold for an equal amount of time, exhale, hold for an equal amount of time. And it varies, but it can be 10 seconds or 15 seconds each way. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold. Now, this is somewhat activating, not that much, but somewhat. So it's more preparatory for arousal than it is full arousal. The third exercise we studied is cyclic hyperventilation with retention. So here you have 2-to-1 inhalation over exhalation. So you inhale, hold, exhale, quickly hold, inhale, hold, exhale. So it's 2-to-1 inhalation over exhalation. And that tends to be very activating. And there are more extreme forms of breathing like this called Wim Hof and other breathing that can get you pretty aroused if you do very much of it. So these three types have different effects on your psychology and your physiology. So in this study, and I want to acknowledge all of my collaborators. We did this in collaboration. Let me show you actually. Belize Yilmaz Belban led the study, and she's a brilliant young woman who unfortunately went off to industry. Nobody else at Stanford does that, but she did. And but she conducted a fabulous study here. The others were Eric Neri, our data manager at the Center on Stress and Health, Manuela Kogan, professor in the Department of Psychiatry, also trained as an internist. Lara Weed was a graduate student at that time, who is now was in the engineering department. Bita Nuriani, who's the manager of the Center on Stress and Health. Gary Hole, who ran Dr. Huberman's lab. Jamie Zeitzer, professor in psychiatry and expert in sleep research. Myself and Andrew Huberman, who a few of you may have heard of, who has made quite a name for himself with the Huberman lab. podcasts, which are just terrific. He has a way of talking at length with great sophistication about very complex subjects, making them clear and just keeping you listening. You know, his podcasts go 2.5 hours, and people love him. So he does remarkable work. So what we did in the study that we collaborated on was compare physiological sighing, box breathing, cyclic hyperventilation, and a brief version of mindfulness meditation. It doesn't fully represent what meditation can be, but it's a taste of something that it involves observing the breath, but not controlling it. And that's why we thought of it as a control. Now we did something extremely clever, and that is we planned to start the study, and we received generous funding from Victor Koo and the Tianren Culture Foundation to do this work. We timed this beautifully. We were going to start bringing subjects into our laboratory in March of 2020. Not a great idea. So we quickly retooled and made it an entirely remote study. So we took advantage of telecommunications and the internet, and the Whoop Corporation generously donated Whoop straps to us to give out to the people who participated. And our team managed to keep in touch and ride herd on and elicit cooperation from about 100 people who agreed to participate in the study. So we had 4 groups. As I mentioned, the mindful meditation control condition, cyclic sighing, box breathing, and cyclic hyperventilation. And so we enrolled initially 111 people. We lost 3 to follow up. And the idea was that we'd get baseline measures. We had weekly measures of affect, psychological. We had regular, constant measuring with the Whoop straps. And we had them randomly assigned to either cyclic sighing, box breathing, or cyclic hyperventilation with retention. And here's what we found. In terms of improving mood, people on standard scales saying that they felt better, less anxious. We had more positive affect. You see the gray line here. So we saw an increase in positive affect in comparison to the meditation group for all 3 of the breath work. And again, just 5 minutes a day, they were doing the exercise. We saw no difference in the ratings of negative affect in any of the conditions. No overall difference in state anxiety. However, if you break up the measure of positive affect according to which of the 3 breathwork groups they were in, you see the green line was the meditation group that had about the lowest affect. It tended to be higher in all 3 of the breath management groups, but particularly in the cyclic sighing group. So you see that, and these are statistically significant differences. So you see that as time went on, people just doing 5 minutes a day of cyclic sighing reported more positive affect. There was not so much of a difference in state anxiety, which was another scale, but people reporting feeling positive affect on a standard measure were most likely to be in the cyclic sighing group. We also looked at measures of physiological arousal, particularly respiratory rate. And although it's hard to see in this particular slide, it's actually the case that the breathwork group in particular had an average lower respiratory rate. This was mainly measured at night on the Whoop strap, but it was significantly lower than the meditation group. So that's particularly interesting because it's a summation of the frequency of breathing. And as I mentioned earlier, many of us breathe too fast. About 6 breaths a minute is usually enough. And many of us are doing like 12 breaths a minute. And as I mentioned, there's this kind of cycle where if you breathe inefficiently, you tend to breathe more rapidly, but actually blow off CO2 and take in less oxygen. It's not a great thing to do. So being able to slow one's respiratory rate actually will have a breathing efficiency and activation lowering effect. And that's what we saw, particularly when comparing the mindful condition with breathwork overall, but in particular with cyclic sighing here. So the overall difference here was not that great, but it was significantly lower, the respiratory rate for cyclic sighing compared to the mindfulness meditation group. We'd hoped there might be difference in resting heart rate or heart rate variability. There wasn't. Now, heart rate variability is a very interesting measure. It's a measure of the change in heart rate over time. So, you may have a pulse of 66 and regular, but actually it's varying around the mean. And it varies largely because of parasympathetic activity, so slowing the heart rate. And what I described to you before about when you exhale, you slow the heart rate because you're increasing venous return to the heart. And when you inhale, obviously, you do the opposite. So that causes a slight variation in heart rate that is mainly a measure of parasympathetic activity. Stephen Porges is a pioneer in this, and he's called that vagal tone, the ability to self-soothe. And so we had hoped that one of these breathwork techniques would be enough to change heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is very important from a health point of view. There are hundreds and hundreds of studies showing, among other things, that if you have had a heart attack, having higher heart rate variability is a strong predictor of surviving a heart attack. So the capacity to regulate, to shift between parasympathetic and sympathetic activity has important health consequences, and it indicates the ability to self-soothe. So we published this study last January in Cell Reports Medicine. We got a fair amount of attention for it, including my 90 seconds with Lisa Kim video of showing her how to do cyclic sighing. But something else happened that was kind of cool. In the New York Times, there was an article that Mayor Eric Adams of New York City said, you know what, there's a science to breathing. And he announced an initiative that has started now in the New York City schools. And he cites a bunch of studies. One of them is our study here, that kindergartners to high school seniors will start the day with breathwork exercises in the New York City schools. And I think that's a terrific thing. I think it's a great idea. I think it will help soothe people, just from the transition from home to school, prepare them to work better and think better. And so I'm delighted that a simple, helpful intervention like this is being employed in a school system that is in a city it's a wonderful city. I grew up there, but it's got a share of stressors too. So being able to manage them better is a good thing. So let's talk a little bit about what sort of generally recommended breathing practices come out of this. I certainly would recommend, and I'll show you how to do it later on, some examples of how to do these breath practices. We have cyclic sighing and box breathing now on this Reverie app that involves self-hypnosis exercises as well. But some more, even if you're not doing a regular practice, there are some things you can do to help yourself and your breathing. One is breathe better, but not faster. Actually, deeper and less frequent breathing during the daytime is probably a good thing. So if you're breathing every 5 seconds a cycle, that's too much. It ought to be more like every 10 seconds. So just try and breathe comfortably. And we tend to emphasize inhalation, but actually exhalation, as I mentioned, tends to be a more soothing component of breathing activity. Andrew Huberman recommends breathing through your nose, as do other people. And if you can try this little experiment right now. It surprised me actually when I did it. And that is just take a breath, close your mouth, and inhale just through your nose. And now do the same thing, but inhale just through your mouth. Now, I think you may find, as I did to my surprise, that even though the sort of opening through the nose is smaller than the mouth by a good bit, it was easier to inhale fully and more easily. Many people who advise people on breathing recommend pretty strongly using your nose when you can. And it turns out that over time, if you get used to doing that, your face and nose sort of makes adjustments that make it easier to do that. And one thing that helps is that there are two forms of inhalation and exhalation that involve different muscle groups. So one is the famous diaphragmatic breathing that opera singers all learn to do. And that is, if you let your belly expand, the diaphragm is a muscle at the bottom of the lungs, between the lungs and the liver and heart. And it drops down, and that helps you to inhale air, and then it contracts, and you exhale air. And it's controlled by the phrenic nerve, the 10th cranial nerve that goes from the brain down along near the heart into the diaphragmatic muscle. And you have a great deal of flexibility in how much air you move with the diaphragm. So it's a good one to use. The other part, of course, is your chest cage, and you contract your intercostal muscles. You expand your chest when you're inhaling and contract them when you exhale. We do both. You need to do both. But in general, having good control over your diaphragmatic breathing can give you better range of respiratory movement in and out. And so over time, if you start to use them differently, you rewire them. Neurons that fire together wire together. So this kind of neural flexibility can lead to reprogramming of neural pathways and changes in muscle strength too that can help you breathe more easily and with more control. It is fine to set up a new pattern of breathing. Your ability to pause between breaths is a good thing to do. So think of six liters of air a minute, but breathing about 6 times a minute, and about 1 liter of air at a time. And try to take deeper and less shallow breaths. Measured breathing, particularly with a longer exhalation, keeps you calm. It avoids excitability of the brain, and helps you sleep. So that's some of what we've learned. I'd say the surprising thing, the thing that caught most people's attention about our collaborative study, was how little it took to get a pretty good outcome. That just 5 minutes a day doing this seemed to make a big difference. And a lot of our subjects really enjoyed it and appreciated the opportunity to do it. So again, if you want to practice with me, we'll be doing that on Thursday. We've added, because of the results of this study, these exercises to Reverie. Reverie is our self-hypnosis and now breathwork app. What happened was that about 4 years ago at a Brain Mind Summit, there was just one in San Francisco this past weekend, a gentleman named Ariel Poehler, who's a serial entrepreneur who went to Stanford Business School and MIT, came up to me. We started talking about this. I was just talking about using hypnosis to help people stop smoking. And as we're talking to each other, he says, would you like to have an app do this? And I said, well, that sounds pretty cool. And he said, well, Amazon Alexa is making pretty easy to create apps because they want to create business. So why don't we start with that and see what happens? So we did a stop smoking app, and we got some generous funding from Amanda Chow, and we set up a study to see how well people stop smoking using that app. And we found, to our surprise, that we got 19% of the people to stop smoking just listening to the hypnosis exercise. I would get them hypnotized and tell them not to focus on fighting smoking or worrying about the urge, but 3 things. For my body, smoking's a poison. I need my body to live. I owe my body respect and protection. And, if you want to talk about damage to respiration, think about putting hot tar and nicotine in your lungs all the time. And we were very pleased, because when we did it in person, we got 23% long-term abstinence, about 50% initially, 23% 2-year complete abstinence from smoking. But this was not bad. And what surprised me also was that the ones who kept smoking wound up cutting their smoking levels in half. So they were smoking 10 cigarettes a day instead of 20. And so, for just having someone listen to your voice on the app, I thought, well, that's not bad. And frankly, the reason I started Reverie is that I've learned things over almost 50 years of teaching people self-hypnosis and having them do it that have to be able to help more people than the ones who can get to see me. And I wanted it to be available, whether I could do it or not. And using the technology that we now have, a lot of it started here in this valley, to disseminate opportunities for people to help themselves in this way just seemed too good to pass up. So we did it. And Ariel said to me a little while later, this has been a great opportunity, but it has its limits too. And so we decided to build an app. So we initially got some bright Stanford students, and we now have a team of about 15 people at Reverie designing the app and building it. And I'm very pleased to see that we're reaching, we've had about 500,000 downloads now, and we have about 20,000 active users a month. And I had, in the original study, there was a wonderful young lady who sort of wandered in and said she'd like to try it. And we taught her to do it. The first time she did it, she didn't like it. She said, you know what? I've been smoking for 25 years. I don't even want to quit. But that night, she tried it again. She lit up a cigarette. She looked at her hand and said, who needs this? And she put it out. She hasn't had a cigarette since. She's been getting her friends to stop smoking, and they're all amazed. They can't believe it. And she said to me, this is some crazy ass voodoo shit. And I mean that in a good way, she said. But the nice thing is, and I'll show you why I think this happens, people can change very radically in a hurry. And, with many of the programs that Tia's organized here, people surprise themselves in what they can do that they didn't think they could do. And that's a wonderful thing. So with Reverie, we have apps for managing pain perception. Hypnosis is a remarkable, and I mean remarkable, treatment for many kinds of acute and chronic pain. And, when people say that, well, things like this are either useless or dangerous or both, I have to remind them that just opioids alone killed 70,000 Americans in overdose last year, 300,000 over the past 10 years. And one of the reasons actually is that fentanyl and Oxycontin and other opioids have different effects on the respiratory system, on breathing, than they do on pain. So for pain and pleasure, that's one receptor and one site in the brain that is affected, the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex. But in the respiratory system, the opioids suppress respiration. They shut down the respiratory activity. And you don't habituate to that the way you habituate to the pain control. So people who use these drugs think, if I'm not getting pain relief, I'm obviously have to take more. So what happens is they just go to sleep and they don't wake up. And that's what happened to Prince, the wonderful musician, and hundreds of thousands of other people. So, I'm sort of more determined than ever to disseminate non-pharmacological means of controlling pain. There's an important role for pharmacology too, but we overuse it, and it's very dangerous. And a lot of these drugs are laced with fentanyl and other things now. So managing pain is very important. Habit quitting, relieving stress, improving sleep, and of course the breathwork exercises. And we have cyclic sighing, a brief breathe better exercise, and box breathing as well on Reverie. And it's available from the App Store and Google Play if you're interested in learning more about it and trying it out. So what happens in hypnosis when people use it to control their stress? We found, using functional neuroimaging, fMRI, here at Stanford, that three things happen in the brain when people go into hypnosis. The first is they turn down activity in the anterior cingulate cortex. This is part of the brain here, circled in yellow. It's part of our salience network. So if you hear a shot or loud noise, and you suddenly switch away from this fascinating talk that I'm giving, that's your salience network saying there's a pattern that doesn't fit anymore. You better investigate it. And so if you can turn down that sort of salience network, you're more likely to be able to focus your attention. And that's why I have the skiing slide there, that when you're skiing, you better focus your attention or you're going to wind up parallel to the ground. And so hypnosis is a state of highly focused attention, like when you get so caught up in a good movie that you forget you're watching a movie and you enter the imagined world. And part of the way you do that is by turning down activity in the salience network. People differ in their ability to experience hypnosis. It turns out from studies done with former Stanford undergraduates who took Psych 1, and we retested their hypnotizability 25 years later. This is Phil Zimbardo and his colleagues did this many years ago. The test-retest reliability of hypnotizability was 0.6. Now, that's about as good over a 25-year interval as IQ is. So people's capacity to experience hypnosis, generally low, medium, and high, is very stable trait. Now, it doesn't mean you can't benefit from exercises that involve hypnotic approaches, but the ones who are highly hypnotizable just suck it up and do it. We call them the poets. The middle range people we call the diplomats. They try it and then they think about it, and they try it and they think about it. The low hypnotizables are the researchers, but they mostly think about it. But the way we structure the exercises is to focus on what you're for, protecting and respecting your body, for example. And so what we find is that the people who are highly hypnotizable have more what we call functional connectivity, that is mutual interactivity between the executive control network and the prefrontal cortex and the dorsal anterior cingulate, the conflict management part of the brain. So if you're coordinating what you're doing with the part of your brain that's worrying about anything else you should be doing, you're more likely to be able to focus and concentrate. And that's what we see happening. So people who thought they were more hypnotized had more reduction in activity in the anterior cingulate cortex. And one thing that's pretty cool is that we found Daniel D'Souza in our group took the lead on a spectroscopy study showing that the hypnotizability is also associated with higher density of GABA, which is an inhibitory neurotransmitter in the anterior cingulate cortex. It's the neurotransmitter that is stimulated by anti-anxiety drugs, benzodiazepines. So these people are very well equipped with their own little anti-anxiety factory in their anterior cingulate, and it helps them to turn down activity in the anterior cingulate, concentrate more intensely. Two other things happen in this state. One is more functional connectivity between the insula, which is a mind-body pathway in the deep frontal portion region of the brain. It helps the brain control the body and also emphasizes interoception. How do you perceive what's going on in your body? And when people get stressed and anxious, there's this snowball effect of you worry about something, then you notice your body getting tense. Your muscles tighten up, maybe your heart rate goes up, you start to sweat, and then you think, oh my God, this must be really bad. And you when that happens, you think, oh, this must be even worse than I thought. So you worry more, and then your body reacts to that, and it's a kind of snowball effect. So the interaction is something that can make anxiety worse than it is. So one of the things you learn to do is control your physical problem first and then deal with the mental problem. Sort of the opposite of the typical way psychology and psychiatry tends to handle anxiety and stress, sort of figure out why you're anxious and why it's not as bad as you thought it was. We sort of take the bottom-up approach of get your body comfortable and then see how much better you can do at figuring out ways of handling the stressor or putting the stressor into perspective. The third thing that we see is inverse connectivity between the prefrontal cortex here and the posterior part of the cingulate cortex. This circle looks like a C on its ends down here is the cingulate cortex. The front is the salience network. The back is what we call the default mode network. It's a part of the brain where when we're not doing much else, we think about ourselves, we reflect on who we are and what people think of us and so on. And inhibiting activity there is something that happens inexperienced meditators too, that they turn down activity there. And it's part of meditation, get over yourself. Don't worry about yourself. Don't judge things. Don't evaluate them. Just let feelings and thoughts flow through you, and cultivate compassion and things like that. So those are the things that happen in hypnosis. And I think it helps us understand what a change mindset is like. That is, instead of worrying about, could I do this? Should I do this? What would it mean? What would people think of me? You get to suspend that judgment about yourself. It's what we call cognitive flexibility, that you can just try out new things without judging them and see what it feels like. So you get to see what it feels like to be different. Now, that's something that scares people about hypnosis. It's what used to be called suggestibility. The guy told the football coach to dance like a ballerina, and he did. I don't like that. I don't like having people make fools of themselves in front of an audience. But at the same time, it illustrates the fact that it's a tremendous opportunity to change if you can just try out being different and see what it feels like. And that's something you can do with hypnosis. We're now in collaboration with my colleague, Professor Nolan Williams at Stanford. He's been promoted, I'm sorry, that didn't change the slide, who runs the brain stimulation lab, to use transcranial magnetic stimulation to actually stimulate the brain's ability to produce hypnotic analgesia. And we're finding that in the first step of this study, that when we apply this magnet to the skull over the prefrontal cortex there, the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, we are actually able to increase hypnotizability. So Afik Fairman, a postdoctoral fellow in my lab, took the lead on this study, showing, and it's under intensive review at the moment at a good journal, to show that this transcranial magnetic stimulation increases hypnotizability compared to a sham treatment. So we're looking at ways to enhance the brain's ability to respond to these. And what are we finding? We're finding, this was a study of almost 16,000 users of Reverie, a full, a substantial, highly statistically significant mean difference level of 1, which is huge. That's a huge difference. 0.3 to 0.5 is 0.3 is a low, 0.5 is a moderate standardized mean difference. 1 is a big mean difference. And you see that at each time point, subjects were able to substantially reduce their stress levels just by using the app. So I'm glad to say that I'm now helping more people while I'm giving you a lecture than I used to in half a year of work here in the clinic. And that reduces my stress. I feel good about that. So we're finding that people, all hypnosis is really self-hypnosis. These are skills you can learn for yourself and take advantage of and help yourself feel a lot better in a hurry. And the other nice thing about it is, the first time you do it, whether it's likely to help or not. I had a lovely young patient who was a pregnant mother, 7 months pregnant, but had very bad lower back disease. And so as the baby grew, she had more and more pain. And they couldn't give her meds because she was pregnant. They implanted a nerve stimulator. It didn't work. But using hypnosis, I had her imagine that she was floating in a warm bath, which is the one thing that used to give her relief. And her pain level went down from 7 to 3 in a few minutes. And she opened her eyes and she looked angry. And I said, "What are you angry about?" She said, "Why in the hell are you the last doctor I got sent to instead of the first?" So there are these simple, straightforward things that we can learn to do to help ourselves relieve stress, pain, and a number of other problems. We now have 60 in-app sessions. We've had 500,000 total downloads to date. It's available in 170 countries. And you're seeing that 8 to 9 out of 10 people report in their initial use of Reverie that it relieves stress, enhances their ability to focus, manage their pain, quit habits. They feel they have more control over the habit. Cyclic sighing has a similar kind of result. 86% of our members doing the cyclic sighing exercise felt more relaxed and less stressed. 82% felt the same thing, more relaxed and less stressed. So we're able to deliver an opportunity for people to learn to help themselves using the app. So in summary, breathing has complex but interesting regulation of the brain. It helps us to regulate activation of the brain. And what's pretty cool is that the brain has figured out a way to regulate itself. that by just changing the rate of respiration and the type of respiration, the brain can stimulate or soothe itself. And that's a pretty clever feedback cycle. It improves mood. It can manage physiological arousal as well. The way we breathe is a habit that can, in fact, be changed. Hypnosis is another brain-based mental activity that can relieve stress. Here, we don't deliberately try to alter respiration, although lately I've been combining cyclic sighing with hypnosis to help people particularly go to sleep. And they find that that combination is very good. I don't have, you'll notice, the feedback numbers from people who were for their insomnia. And we got very few responses. And I thought maybe it's not working, and we got in touch with these people and they said, look, I didn't want to send you a response. I just wanted to fall asleep. I said, okay, I'll take that. That's fine. It's clear, though, that these practices can be widely disseminated and people can do things in a hurry that will help themselves and their bodies feel better. So catch your breath. I want to express special appreciation to Victor Koo, who the founder of Chanman Culture and a board member of the Global Wellness Institute, for his inspiration and support of our breath work. And also, and as I mentioned, Winnie is here, Amanda Chow, Manami Chow, who helped us do that first smoking study and another one on pain that helped us show that hypnosis using the Reverie app is helpful and effective. I also want to mention our other funding, National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, who's been very interested in this work, the National Institute on Aging, the National Cancer Institute, National Institute of Mental Health, the California Breast Cancer Research Program, the Dana Foundation, and the MacArthur Foundation. The two guys on the right are discussing, one was saying I was close to a breakthrough when the grant money ran out. And finally, in terms of how we handle and face stress, these two guys are sitting on the stairs and one is saying to the other, my feeling is that while we should have the deepest respect for reality, we should not let it control our lives. And now more than ever, that's true. Okay, so I would welcome questions and see if I had the first question.
Yes, thank you, David, for an inspiring summary of your pioneering work and the hope that it brings us. I have several questions. The first one is you spoke about the power of the hypnosis portions of the app, and I wondered if there had been any evaluation of the natural effect on the breath pattern when someone is being hypnotized. Not that you were guiding them to breathe a certain way, but whether hypnosis renders any modulation in the breath.
That's a very good question, and I don't have an answer for it, but we ought to do it. It's of course, monitoring breath is a little more complicated than just asking people how they feel. But it may well be that some of the I have little doubt that if nothing else, when we do the stress reduction app and the pain control app too, that people probably slow their respiratory rate. Not necessarily throughout the month, but while they're doing it. So at the least, I think there probably is less hyperventilation, less overbreathing. My initial hypnotic instruction, take a deep breath, let the breath out slowly, let your eyes relax, let your body float. So I am asking them to sort of take charge, if ever so briefly, with their respiration. And I do think it's entirely possible that some of the relaxation effects we're getting have to do with the modulation of respiration. It's a very interesting point.
Thank you. You just kindly named what your opening invitation in a hypnotic guided practice is, or hypnosis guided practice. Could you say more about it, since there is so much mystery for many of our participants as what is meant by hypnosis, and you reference self-hypnosis.
Sure. What we do is we say to people, there's nothing that fancy or complicated about it. It can happen in under a minute if you've got the capacity. I ask people to look up, slowly close your eyes, take a deep breath, let the breath out, let your eyes relax, but keep them closed, let your body float. Imagine you're floating somewhere safe and comfortable, like a bath, a lake, a hot tub, or just floating in space. And then let one hand or the other float up in the air like a balloon. And that's your opportunity to help yourself and your body feel more comfortable. And then we'll go on and talk about whatever we do. By the way, if you want a kick, after I was on Andrew Huberman's podcast, I tested his hypnotizability. And he's this prodigiously smart, big, burly, tough-looking guy. And he was very open to hypnosis, and he's been very positive about it. But his hand is floating up, and I pull it down, and it floats right back up. He's looking at his hand like, what on earth is going on here? You know? And that element of surprise is something I just love doing this work, is to see that people surprise themselves about the ways in which they can alter their body control. Mm-hmm. And when we have people come out of hypnosis, and that's on YouTube, by the way, you can see it on YouTube. Mm-hmm. We talk about whatever we're doing, float, picture your problems on an imaginary screen, but imagine your body is floating safe and comfortable. And then when you come out, count backwards from 3 to 1. On 3, get ready. 2, with your eyelids closed. Roll up your eyes. 1, let your eyes open. Hand float back down. Make a fist open. And that's the end of the exercise. So it's very rapid. There's nothing fancy about it. Doesn't take very long at all. And it works because of your hypnotizability, not because of me. I'm just showing you how to use it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for unpacking that and making it available for everyone to understand. Coming back to the focus on the breathing practices, one individual writes, I have tried to do guided breathing with my mother, as I noticed she is very quick to do chest breathing. And she's a very quick chest breather. And I wanted her to try some slow belly breaths. However, every time we try, she says she gets spinning in the brain and gets agitated. Can you suggest what are some good beginner guidance techniques for inviting others for guided breathing?
Sure. And if, she's uncomfortable, let's listen to that and not do anything that makes her more uncomfortable. But I suspect she may be breathing shallowly and frequently, but she may also have some respiratory problem that needs medical attention. But I would try to emphasize with her not so much, trying to do the diaphragmatic breathing if she has trouble doing it, but instead let her focus on exhale rather than inhale. Instead of the struggle to inhale, keep inhaling. Just make your exhalations slow as you're doing cyclic sighing, and see if that doesn't help, because that may start to reduce the arousal and anxiety that over time just makes it harder for her instead of easier. So just try with the nice slow exhale and see where you go from there.
And to reiterate what you said in your prepared talk, that the extension of the exhalation exceeds the length of time of the inhalation.
Right. Exactly. So it should be about 2 to 1. That's right. Mm-hmm. 2 to 1 exhalation to inhalation time.
Thank you. You also mentioned that some people may have an organic condition that is impacting their respiratory system. And an individual writes, can you talk about how those with lung diseases and disorders can also use breathing, or are there alternatives that they could use instead? So use breathing.
Well, that's a complex issue that has a lot to do with lung capacity and whatever limitations there are on the lung's ability to transfer oxygen and CO2. Mm-hmm. And so that's something I would say, talk with the doctor who's helping you with the lung disease to do it. But again, I think the general principles that I'm talking about, what can happen to people with lung diseases, is the more anxious they get about their inability to breathe. And boy, there's nothing that'll get you anxious faster than not being able to breathe, right? There are a lot of other things we do that we can not do them for a while and it doesn't bother us much. Breathing, you cannot eat for a long time. You cannot sleep. You get kind of irascible, but you don't breathe for, you have trouble breathing for a minute and you're anxious. So, but the problem is the anxiety can cycle on itself. And so again, if you can focus not on trying to force yourself to breathe more and particularly not breathe faster, but a little more deeply. And again, emphasizing more on the exhale than the inhale, which seems paradoxical, but actually helps. That may help some people, even with lung diseases, to be more comfortable, because there's the secondary anxiety and attempt to rush breathing that actually makes your problem worse rather than better. You're blowing off CO2 more than you're taking in oxygen, and you don't want to do that. So just try and, focus on the process more than the outcome and see how it feels.
Thank you. Further clarification about breathing practices, an individual asks, does one breathe predominantly through one nostril and that switches periodically? Is the right nostril heating and the left nostril cooling?
I by and large, there's a lot been said about different nostrils with different functions. I would say that, it could be that, body temperature tends to be higher than ambient temperature. And so if you're inhaling more through one nostril, you're probably heating it and cooling, on the way out. But I don't know of any evidence that left versus right is sort of characteristically different in terms of temperature of the air, heating or cooling the air. I think nasal breathing is good mainly because it's easier, that it's easier to take in and expel air rather efficiently compared to mouth breathing, where there's a lot of competition for other things like eating and swallowing and stuff like that. So I think that's a good reason to do nasal breathing, but I don't know that laterality, there may be some evidence about it, but I don't know about it. It permanently makes it easier to breathe or better to breathe through one nostril than the other.
Thank you. Returning to your elegant study, there are two questions. The first is, did the instruction provide any of the anatomy and physiology information as you shared in your talk tonight, so that the participants had some location in their body of the mechanisms of breathing as they were invited to do whatever form they were in, what group they were in?
The main instructions had not so much to do with the part of the neurophysiology, but yes, with the respiratory physiology. So with cyclic sighing, for example, we asked them to start out your inhalation by expanding your belly. So make it primarily diaphragmatic, hold, and then completely fill your lungs by expanding your chest. And then slowly exhale with both. So particularly for cyclic sighing, but the others too, we would give an instruction about if it were important to have predominantly diaphragmatic or chest inhalation and exhalation.
And did you, in your data collection, have any verification of their physiological action as they self-reported that they were doing one of the modalities?
Well, we did have somebody asked about the Whoop strap. So Whoop is a company that makes a watch-like strap that measures a whole bunch of things. It doesn't actually look like a watch like this thing, but it records your physical activity, your respiration, heart rate. And so it gave us that kind of very complex physiological data, and those were the results about respiratory rate and heart rate variability and things like that. So yes, we did have a bunch of very interesting physiological data.
And you illuminated the good news of the New York City schools. Are you aware of whether the children are given guidance on the specifics of what diaphragmatic breathing includes, or is it just take 5 minutes to breathe?
No, I think they're doing specific breathing exercises, but it's not just breathe. I think they're giving more. I don't know exactly what their program is now, but I think they are given instructions about how to breathe, and to give them a sense of not just breathe any way, but breathe in ways that should help them relax.
And an individual pointed out that one slide had stated that there were 12 breaths per minute, and your verbal cue was 6 breaths per minute as a aspirational goal. Could you clarify? Yeah,
typically many people breathe shallowly but rapidly. So they do a full breathing cycle every 5 seconds, 12 a minute. But the goal, the aspiration, is more like 6. If you breathe more slowly and deeply, and your breathing cycle is 10 seconds rather than 5.
Thank you. And what would you say to someone who finds themselves breathing 15, 20 breaths per minute and has learned this aspirational goal, what would you offer them to support them?
I would say try, particularly again, to not emphasize more and more inhalation, which tends to be this vicious cycle where you get more agitated and less efficient breathing, but focus oddly enough on expiration and just try exhaling more slowly. And I see one person here, attendee, said, when I do cyclic sighing, I generally end up yawning. What does that signify? That it's working. You're relaxing yourself. Your parasympathetic nervous system is taking over. And so if you end up yawning after this lecture, that's a different thing. But if you end up yawning while you're doing cyclic sighing, you're doing it exactly right.
There is another question asking if there is a free trial included in the program.
There is at the beginning, there is a free trial period, yes. And there's also a good at Reverie for Good program where if people are financially constrained, it's not very expensive, but if people are financially constrained, they can write to Reverie and ask to participate in the Reverie for Good program.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And has your work explored the process of chanting or singing, which is included in a lot of contemplative traditions?
Yes, it is. And, of course, the interesting thing is that singing, it coordinates your respiratory activity. When you sing with people, I think singing, making music together is the second most pleasurable thing humans can do together. It's a wonderful thing. You coordinate your respiration as you sing. You have a prolonged exhale. You inhale briefly, and then you sing the words and all that. So I think there is something intrinsically psychophysiologically relaxing and enjoyable about making music. And part of it is you're doing cyclic sighing, only it's, now this is not a part. I love music, I love singing, but it's not a part of this particular practice. But I think it's one reason that we humans have found a way to do it.
Well, thank you for generously entering into that topic as another way that we can, as a community, gain the health and well-being that all of these sessions are in support of. And I want to come to the 3 affirmations that you referenced in the hypnosis programs. That for smoking, you said that the smoking was a poison, that the body was needed to stay alive, and to respect and I think it was protect your body. Tell us a little bit more about those 3 components of the intentions.
Sure. It's for my body, smoking's a poison. I need my body to live. I owe my body respect and protection. I ask people to think of their body as if it were their baby. Would you ever put tar nicotine into the lungs of a baby? Hell no. Well, your body is every bit as dependent on you as your baby is. Mm-hmm. So when smokers say, I'm doing this to myself, and I say, no, you're not. You're doing it to your body, and you yourself will pay a price for it sooner or later. But if you say it to myself, it's like saying, I've been doing it for 20 years. I can just stop and everything will be fine. Well, it might be, but it might not be. You may have done too much damage to your body. Mm-hmm. So, and also think about, you can feel good from the moment, when smokers quit and they get all nasty with their family and all that, they say, look, if you're looking for an excuse not to quit, don't quit. If you should feel good from the moment you make the commitment to respect and protect your body. It's not what you're against, it's what you're for. For my body, smoking is a poison. I need my body to live. I owe my body respect and protection. You focus on what you're for, and you feel good from the moment you make that commitment.
Mm-hmm. With that depth of insight and wisdom, have you partnered those intentions with my body needs breath? My body needs the protection of the optimized breathing.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, Tia. We haven't particularly formulated it in that way, but obviously, when you're doing it, particularly if your body is struggling, if you're someone who is an anxious overbreather all the time, mm-hmm. and your body is struggling, you say, well, I have a way now to help my body feel better, the way you would comfort a child. You don't get angry at it. That's another problem. A lot of people with pain and other problems, they get frustrated with their body. But instead of being frustrated, you look at your body as a creature that depends on you, that's doing the best it can. And if you can help it to do better, go for it, do it. And so you're in that kind of, affirmative rather than negative struggle, an affirmative caring position in relationship to your body.
We had a session prior to this one on self-compassion, so there's some carryover of that intentionality in this conversation that we're having. And
there is, and that's very important to you, but it is different from compassion for your body. So I ask people to dissociate a little, look at your body, see your relationship with it, and recognize that you run the show, you control what happens with your body, but your body has to react to what you do to it and with it. So if you're going to be compassionate, one very important place to be compassionate is with your own body, with yourself too, but also with your body.
Thank you for illuminating that distinction. Very helpful.
Sure.
Thank you for your generous sharing of your insights and practical help. Thank you very much for your session, and we look forward to being with you in the forthcoming sessions. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Take care. Bye now.